On the morning of December 4th, 1872, the crew of the Dei Gratia spotted something unusual on the Atlantic horizon. A brigantine drifting under a partial sail. No flag of distress, no visible damage, just moving wrong. First mate Oliver Devoux took a small boat across. He boarded the Mary Celeste and found something that has never been explained in 150 years since. The ship was intact, the cargo was untouched, the food was on the table, and the captain's pocket watch was still ticking in his cabin, and every person on board was gone. Not dead, not overboard, there were no bodies. Not rescued, no other vessels reported picking up survivors, just gone as if the Atlantic had reached up and taken them. Welcome back to Echoes of the Vanished. On today's episode, we're going where the official record ends and the real questions begin. Because the Mary Celeste isn't a ghost story, it's an unsolved crime, and the evidence points somewhere most historians don't want to follow. Let's start with what we know for certain, because the Mary Celeste case has been buried under so much myth that the actual facts are more disturbing than the fiction. The Mary Celeste was an American brigantine, a two-masted merchant vessel, well-built, well-maintained. She departed New York on November 7th, 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy, carrying 17,001 barrels of industrial alcohol for a company called Mesner, Akerman and Company. On board, Captain Benjamin Briggs, experienced, respected, and by all accounts a cautious man, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and a crew of 7, 10 people in total. None of them were ever seen again. The last confirmed log entry was November 25th. Normal conditions, normal heading. The crew were approximately 400 miles southwest of the Azores, and nothing in that entry suggests anything was wrong. When the Dei Gratia found her 10 days later, she had travelled nearly 800 miles further east, under sail, in roughly the right direction, which means either the crew were on board and functioning for days after that final entry, and then vanished, or something else was controlling that ship. In a moment, I'm going to show you why the physical evidence on board actually rules out most of the popular theories, but first, the cargo. 9 of the 17,001 barrels were found empty. That detail launched what became the dominant theory. Fumes from leaking alcohol built up in the hold. The crew panicked, fearing an explosion, and evacuated onto the ship's lifeboat with a rope tethering them to the Mary Celeste while they waited for the danger to pass. Then the rope snapped and the current took them. It's a plausible theory that has the advantage of not requiring anything supernatural or conspiratorial, and some versions of it was accepted by most maritime historians for decades. But sit with the evidence for a moment. The hatches to the cargo hold, when investigators opened them in Gibraltar, showed no sign of fire damage, no scorch marks, no residue. Industrial alcohol burns hot and dirty. If there had been an explosion or even a sustained fire, the hold would show it, and it didn't. There was also no soot on the pump equipment, which had clearly been used, suggesting someone was actively managing flooding, not running from fumes. And the 9 empty barrels? They were made of red oak. Every other barrel on board was white oak. Red oak is more porous. Those 9 barrels almost certainly leaked, but not because of any incident on the voyage, but because they were improperly manufactured. It's a storage problem, not a catastrophe. So why did investigators keep returning to the cargo theory? That's a question worth asking, because the cargo was owned by a US government contractor, and the moment liability entered the picture, the official inquiry in Gibraltar moved in a very specific direction. We'll come back to what that inquiry missed, but first, the lifeboat. The ship's lifeboat was gone. That fact is not in dispute. What is in dispute is what it tells us, because the lifeboat wasn't cut loose in a panic. The davits, the rigging that holds a lifeboat in place, showed signs of an orderly launch. Ropes properly rigged, equipment handled correctly. This was not a crew in chaos. This was a crew that made a decision. They chose to leave. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable for the accident theories. The Mary Celeste was carrying over 1,000 barrels of alcohol, a cargo worth tens of thousands of dollars, in 1872. Captain Briggs was part owner of the ship. He had a financial stake in completing that voyage. Experienced sailors don't abandon a seaworthy vessel over a smell. They don't leave food on the table and books open on the desk unless they intend to come back. The evidence on board doesn't look like an emergency evacuation. It looks like a very short trip, like the crew stepped off the ship expecting to return within hours. Something happened between leaving and returning, something that meant they never made it back. The leading theory among serious maritime researchers today is a combination of factors. A seawater incursion into the hold, a sudden rush of seawater-soaked alcohol vapor when the hatches were opened, a brief but frightening incident that convinced the crew to get off the ship temporarily, and then the wind caught the Mary Celeste while they were in the lifeboat, and the tether failed. It's not a dramatic answer, it's a mundane one, but mundane explanations are often the ones that are true. Except there's one piece of evidence that still doesn't fit, and it's the piece that the Gibraltar inquiry spent almost no time on at all. The official inquiry in Gibraltar was led by Frederick Flood, the Attorney General for Gibraltar, and a man who, by all accounts, really wanted this to be a murder. Flood was convinced from the start that the crew of the De Gratia, the ship that found the Mary Celeste, had something to do with the disappearance. He ordered forensic tests on a sword found on board, believing marks on the blade were bloodstains. They were rust. He commissioned an analysis of a dark substance on the deck, again certain it was blood. It was not blood. He pushed hard for a conspiracy theory involving insurance fraud, collusion between Briggs and the captain of the De Gratia, and a staged disappearance. He had no evidence for any of it. The inquiry ultimately awarded the De Gratia crew only 1/5 of the salvage value they were entitled to, a punishment, effectively, for being suspected of something they were never charged with. What Flood's obsession cost us is this: the real questions were never properly examined, the navigation data, the specific pattern of water in the hold, the testimony of the De Gratia crew, who were treated as suspects rather than witnesses. We have never had a proper forensic investigation of the Mary Celeste. What we have is a 19th century official who decided what happened before he looked at the evidence and bent everything he found to fit that conclusion. That's not unusual in history, but it's why, 150 years later, we still don't know what happened to 10 people on a perfectly seaworthy ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Benjamin Briggs was described by everyone who knew him as a man who didn't make mistakes. His wife brought their 2-year-old daughter on a voyage she had taken before. The crew were experienced, the ship was sound. And still 10 people stepped off a vessel in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and were never seen again. The most likely explanation is painfully ordinary: a rope, a wind shift, a few seconds of bad luck in one of the loneliest places on Earth. But we cannot prove it, and that gap between what the evidence suggests and what we can actually confirm is exactly the kind of gap that keeps this channel going. There are cases like this one on every continent, in every century, with the same unanswered question at the centre of them. If you need to know what actually happened, not just what history settled for, consider subscribing. The investigation doesn't stop here. History doesn't always leave answers. Sometimes it leaves silence. This is echoed of the vanished, and the silence still speaks.